Imperial Beach, California has been forced to live with a public health and environmental crisis for far too long. For years, residents, families, surfers, lifeguards, Border Patrol agents, Navy personnel, local businesses, and visitors have had to ask a question no coastal community should ever have to ask. Is the beach safe today? That question should be shocking. In Imperial Beach, it has become routine. The contamination crisis affecting Imperial Beach is not new. It did not appear overnight. It is not the result of one storm, one broken pipe, one failed pump station, or one unlucky event. It is the result of decades of underbuilt infrastructure, delayed maintenance, fragmented responsibility, weak accountability, cross-border bureaucracy, and political failure. The Tijuana River Valley pollution crisis has lasted so long because too many agencies, governments, and decision-makers treated it as someone else's problem. But for Imperial Beach, it has never been someone else's problem. It has been in the water, in the estuary, on the beach, in the air, in the local economy, and in the daily lives of the people who live here. The source of the crisis is well known. Sewage, polluted stormwater, trash, sediment, and industrial waste from the Tijuana River watershed have repeatedly crossed the U.S.-Mexico border and flowed into the Tijuana River Valley, the Tijuana River estuary, Imperial Beach, and the Pacific Ocean. Some pollution moves through the river itself. Some comes through cross-border canyon flows. Some enters the ocean from failing or insufficient wastewater systems in Mexico and can be carried north by coastal currents. This is not a mystery. It is a documented infrastructure and governance failure. The most frustrating part is that the problem has been known for decades. Government agencies have studied it, scientists have measured it, residents have smelled it, public health officials have warned about it, local leaders have demanded action, beaches have been closed again and again. Still, the crisis continued. Imperial Beach became the place where delay had consequences. The contamination problem has lasted so long because the region never built a complete, reliable, future-ready wastewater system for the reality of the border. Tijuana grew. Wastewater flows increased. Storm events overwhelmed fragile infrastructure. Pump stations failed. Pipes broke. Treatment capacity lagged behind need. Sediment, trash, and sewage clogged systems that were already under stress. Meanwhile, Imperial Beach remained downstream. The South Bay International Wastewater Treatment Plant was intended to be part of the solution, and it is an important facility. But one treatment plant alone cannot solve a regional binational wastewater crisis when the broader system feeding into it is incomplete, under-maintained, and vulnerable to repeated failure. A real solution would have required adequate treatment capacity, reliable collection systems, backup pumps, emergency storage, redundant power, modernized pipes, sediment control, industrial discharge enforcement, and permanent operations funding. Instead, the region received partial solutions, delayed upgrades, and emergency responses after damage had already occurred. That is one of the central failures. Government repeatedly responded after the crisis rather than preventing the next one. After a spill, officials investigated. After beach closures, agencies issued warnings. After residents complained about odor, air monitoring expanded. After public pressure grew, emergency declarations were made. After years of damage, funding finally began moving. That is backwards. A public health crisis should not have to become unbearable before it becomes urgent. For too long, the contamination crisis was treated primarily as a diplomatic and infrastructure issue. It is those things, but it is also much more. It is a public health issue. It is an environmental justice issue. It is an economic issue. It is a military readiness issue. It is a coastal access issue. It is a quality of life issue. It is a basic failure of government to protect a community from known harm. Imperial Beach residents have not just lost access to the ocean, they have lost trust. When beaches are closed for hundreds or thousands of days, that is not normal. When families avoid the shoreline because of sewage warnings, that is not normal. When children grow up near a beach, they are repeatedly told not to touch. That is not normal. When residents report sewage odors inside their homes, that is not normal. When a coastal city's identity, recreation, tourism, and local business climate are damaged by pollution from another jurisdiction, that is not normal. The fact that this has been normalized is itself part of the failure. The contamination crisis also continued because accountability was spread too thin. Mexico has responsibility for much of the wastewater infrastructure where many of the flows originate. The United States has responsibility through federal agencies, including the International Boundary and Water Commission, the Environmental Protection Agency, and other entities involved in border water management. California has water quality and public health responsibilities. San Diego County has emergency and health responsibilities. Local governments have had to advocate, warn, and respond. But when everyone has a role, too often, no one is held fully responsible. The sewage does not care about jurisdiction. The river does not stop because an agency needs another meeting. Coastal currents do not wait for a treaty interpretation. Residents do not breathe cleaner air because a project is waiting for a funding cycle. Imperial Beach has suffered because the systems of responsibility were slower than the pollution itself. The crisis has also lasted because infrastructure maintenance was not treated with the seriousness it deserved. Building a project is not enough. A wastewater system must be maintained every day. Pumps must work. Pipes must be inspected. Sediment must be removed. Trash must be captured. Flow must be monitored. Backup systems must be ready. Operators must have funding, staffing, equipment, and authority. Too much attention was placed on major projects without enough guaranteed commitment to the ordinary, unglamorous work that keeps sewage out of rivers and oceans. That is how preventable failures become chronic failures. Dry weather sewage flows are especially unacceptable. Storms can overwhelm systems, and wet weather flows are difficult to manage. But sewage crossing the border during dry weather is a clear sign that wastewater infrastructure is failing under ordinary conditions. Dry weather flows should have triggered immediate zero-tolerance enforcement, emergency repairs, and binational escalation. Instead, they became another repeated feature of life in the Tijuana River Valley. No community should be expected to accept that. The crisis also reflects a failure to plan for growth. Tijuana is a major city in a fast-growing border region. Wastewater infrastructure should have been expanded ahead of demand, not after years of failure. The need for larger, stronger, more resilient treatment and conveyance systems was predictable. Population growth, urban development, aging infrastructure, industrial activity, and stormwater impacts were all foreseeable. A responsible long-term strategy would have recognized that the border region needed a wastewater system designed for the future, not one constantly struggling to catch up with the past. The industrial component of the crisis has also not received enough attention. The public often describes the problem as a sewage crisis, and sewage is a major part of it. But the Tijuana River watershed has also carried industrial waste, chemical contaminants, trash, tires, sediment, and other pollutants. That makes the issue more serious than ordinary wastewater contamination. It means stronger source control, industrial pretreatment enforcement, inspections, penalties, monitoring, and binational environmental regulation should have been central to the response years ago. Imperial Beach should not have had to wait for advanced scientific studies to confirm what residents already knew from experience. Something was wrong in the water, and something was wrong in the air. The air quality dimension of this crisis has changed the public conversation. For years, warnings focused heavily on water contact. Residents were told not to swim, surf, or touch contaminated ocean water after sewage flows. But the crisis does not end at the shoreline. When polluted water releases gases and odors into nearby neighborhoods, exposure can affect people who never enter the water. That means the old model of beach closure signs and water contact warnings was not enough. A serious response should have included earlier air monitoring, indoor air protections, school and workplace guidance, public health screening, filtration support, and worker safety protocols for those regularly exposed in the river valley and coastal zone. The economic damage has also been underestimated. Imperial Beach is a small coastal city whose identity is tied to the ocean. Beach closures do not only inconvenience surfers. They affect tourism, restaurants, local shops, hotels, youth programs, community events, property values, and the city's reputation. Every closure sign sends a message. Every news story about sewage pollution affects how people view the city. Every family that decides not to visit represents lost economic activity. The community has paid a price for failures it did not create. That is why this crisis is not only environmental, it is fundamentally unfair. Imperial Beach has been asked to absorb the consequences of decisions made elsewhere. The pollution originates largely outside the city's control, yet the city bears the beach closures, public health concerns, economic damage, and reputational harm. Local officials and residents can advocate, organize, testify, and demand action, but they cannot independently rebuild Tijuana's wastewater system or force federal agencies to move faster. That imbalance is one reason the crisis has endured. The people most affected had the least direct power to fix the source of the problem. What could have stopped this? The answer begins with urgency. The crisis could have been reduced or prevented if the United States and Mexico had treated the Tijuana River watershed as a shared public health system decades ago. That would have meant building sufficient wastewater treatment capacity earlier, upgrading failing infrastructure before collapse, and creating enforceable binational deadlines instead of relying on slow-moving agreements and partial funding. A real solution would have required permanent funding, not occasional emergency money. Wastewater systems are not fixed by one-time announcements. They need stable operations and maintenance budgets year after year. Without reliable maintenance funding, even expensive infrastructure eventually fails. The region needed a dedicated binational funding mechanism that could not be delayed by politics every budget cycle. The crisis could also have been reduced through stronger enforcement. Industrial dischargers should have faced tighter monitoring and real penalties. Sewage bypasses should have triggered mandatory corrective action. Pump station failures should have required public reporting and immediate repair schedules. Agencies responsible for infrastructure should have been required to disclose failures in real time, explain causes, and publish timelines for correction. Transparency should never have depended on public pressure. Imperial Beach deserved real-time public information years ago. Residents should have had access to clear dashboards showing wastewater flows, beach status, air quality data, pump station conditions, project progress, spill events, and responsible agencies. People should not have had to piece together information from scattered reports, agency pages, public meetings, and news articles. Public trust requires public visibility. The crisis could also have been reduced through better emergency infrastructure. Backup pumps, backup power, temporary storage, bypass prevention systems, trash capture, sediment removal, and rapid response crews should have been positioned before failures occurred. In a watershed with a known history of sewage flows, emergency preparedness should have been built into the system. The region also needed a stronger stormwater strategy. Heavy rain will always create risk in the Tijuana River watershed, but predictable risk can be managed. Detention basins, diversion systems, sediment control, trash capture, green infrastructure, and cross-border stormwater planning could have reduced the volume and toxicity of flows reaching Imperial Beach. Storm events should not be treated as surprises in a region where the consequences are already known. Long-term wastewater reuse should have been part of the solution much earlier. In a water-stressed region, treated wastewater is a resource. Advanced treatment and reuse projects in Mexico could reduce the volume of wastewater entering vulnerable systems while creating a more sustainable water supply. Instead of allowing recoverable water to become a pollution problem, the region should have invested earlier in reuse, recycling, and modern water management. The federal government should also have recognized the national importance of this crisis sooner. This is not merely a local beach issue. It affects an international border, a major estuary, public lands, federal personnel, military training areas, coastal waters, and interstate environmental obligations. When a crisis crosses borders and affects public health, it requires federal leadership equal to the scale of the problem. Imperial Beach should not have had to beg for that recognition. The path forward must be different from the past. Success cannot be measured by press conferences, agreements, or project renderings. It must be measured by results. Are dry weather sewage flows eliminated? Are wet weather flows controlled? Are beaches open and safe? Are odors reduced? Is air quality improving? Are residents protected? Are agencies reporting honestly? Are projects completed on time? Is maintenance funded permanently? Are responsible parties held accountable when systems fail? Those are the standards that matter. Imperial Beach Technology believes this crisis should be understood for what it is: a preventable failure that persisted because accountability was delayed, infrastructure was underbuilt, and the community most affected did not have the power to force the solution on its own. But the future does not have to repeat the past. Imperial Beach can be a model for modern coastal resilience, public health protection, environmental monitoring, cross-border infrastructure accountability, and transparent civic technology. The city can become a place where data, engineering, public policy, and community advocacy work together to prevent harm before it reaches residents. But that future requires honesty about why the crisis lasted so long. It lasted because warnings were not enough. It lasted because studies were not enough. It lasted because partial fixes were not enough. It lasted because the people with authority moved slower than the pollution. The contamination problem in Imperial Beach could have been stopped, or at least dramatically reduced, by acting earlier, funding seriously, maintaining honestly, enforcing aggressively, and treating residents' health as non-negotiable. The technology, engineering, and policy tools existed. What was missing was sustained political will. Imperial Beach deserves more than sympathy. It deserves clean water, clean air, open beaches, accountable government, and a future no longer defined by sewage warnings. This community has carried the consequences of failure long enough. Now the standard must be simple: fix the system, protect the people, and never allow Imperial Beach to be treated as the acceptable endpoint of someone else's contamination again.